छोटे सेव मेहरा जी छा गए।
बचा लेना।
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग्स से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
This is the third anniversary of the big constitutional changes in the status of Jammu and Kashmir. In the usual journalism school, among the first things you are taught is the rule of three, or the three example rule, which means once you have 3 pointers in the same direction, your story is established. We are therefore looking at 3 things that have changed for the better since 5th August 2019, 3 things that should have happened but haven't, and 3 that have gotten worse. But why are you going on about Kashmir, you might ask me? Who's even thinking about it anymore? So Shekhar Gupta, what's wrong with you? Now, this will be a legitimate question, which is precisely the most important change for the better. If Kashmir has receded in our minds, and the third anniversary of the changes did not even feature on the media headlines, front pages, or primetime discussions, nor trend on Twitter even for an hour, it means that dramatic and audacious move achieved something substantive. Think about it calmly. For the past 75 years, barring one sizable interregnum of relative calm between 1972 and 1987, this was the post-Shimla Accord, post-1971 war and Shimla Accord calm. Barring that, Jammu and Kashmir has only featured on top of our minds and in our headlines as a chronic crisis. That R used here is for public opinion all across India and especially in Jammu and Kashmir. I will explain what I mean. If it was seen as a perennially troubled zone in the rest of the country, those living in the state were direct victims. So we were only hassled far away from the state, but those living in the state were really suffering right there. That Kashmir now as a crisis, Kashmir as a crisis has fallen off our minds is the first big positive change. That's why we say so. The ever-looming cloud of Kashmir as crisis weighed heavy on our politics as an easy connection was made between the valley, terrorism, separatism, Islam and Pakistan. It helped one side on our political wrestling mat, political akhada, define the national interest in a particular way. The founder of Jansangh, Syama Prasad Mukherjee, died in Kashmir mysteriously for his followers and thereby became an eternal martyr to the cause. That is why decades later, in trying to get ahead in the leadership tussle in the BJP, Murli Manohar Joshi led that march in December 91 and January 1992 to unfurl the tricolour in Srinagar. It is besides the point that the face in that historic picture that grew the most in stature from that outing was one young, relatively unknown functionary, I would even say Karyakarta then, Narendra Modi. In fact, there is a picture from Praveen Jain, my brilliant photo editor, that we have on the walls of our office, or our newsroom, that shows you precisely that moment in Srinagar. Armed insurrection in Kashmir with an undeniable Pakistani connection got built into our pan-national psyche 1989 and onwards, and then filtered down into our popular culture. It sparked the flurry of the Sunny Deol genre in Bollywood, where for the first time the Muslim was mostly a bad guy, terrorist and often a Pakistani stooge. And remember, this started not even in Bollywood, this started in Tamil cinema. So Roja was a Tamil film that came out earlier than these, and that was inspired by a Tamil manager of a public sector company, public sector oil major, who was kidnapped by terrorists in Kashmir while he was on duty in Kashmir. Now that genre has faded. Next, barring China and Turkey, almost no other nation of any consequence has even spoken about the Kashmir issue in the past 3 years. Mahathir spoke once and then he disappeared himself, and his successors in Malaysia are not interested. All of the Gulf countries, the Islamic world elsewhere seem relieved that this doesn't seem an issue anymore. The OIC statements no longer count. Nobody takes them seriously, besides other reasons, also because it not only would keep totally silent on what's happening to Uyghurs in China, in Xinjiang, but also invite the Chinese foreign minister as the most prominent non-Muslim guest at its summit. This one was in Islamabad, the last one. And third, Pakistan. Imran Khan made Kashmir the campaign of his life but lost out as nobody paid him any attention internationally. He ratcheted up tensions with India, stopped trade, let his economy slide, and today the nation with several more nukes than India is praying for an FATF, that is Financial Action Task Force, reprieve in the morning and an IMF bailout at night. That the truce on the line of control came about and has held tells us that story. There will always be the odd terror attack, but Pakistan at this point counts for nothing on the Kashmir issue. An important upshot of this wide global acceptance of the fait accompli is that the negotiating equation between India and Pakistan on Kashmir has shifted. The Pakistani establishment is not so stupid, they are not so dumb to have thought that they will get all of the valley, that all of the valley will fall in their laps. But they were smart enough to believe that they will get something by way of a gain if they could force India into negotiations. It was with this hope that they launched every operation beginning 1947-48 when their ideas might have been more maximalist, to 1965, where around this time in August was also launched what was called Operation Gibraltar. In fact, I will tell you the detailed story of Operation Gibraltar maybe over the next week in one of the episodes of Katta Clutter. So every operation they launched, covert or overt in the past decades, Kargil being the last by the way, had the same expectation, that force India to come to the negotiating table and get something from India on the valley. This is now over. No Indian parliament would ever reverse what's been done. Forget whatever rhetoric anybody uses. Even in the unlikely event of Congress getting 300 seats, this will not be reversed. So Congress in any case won't reverse it, but no party would reverse it. Why do I say Congress in any case won't reverse it? Because Congress was doing this slowly all the time. They were diluting Article 370 and Kashmir's special status slowly in their own sort of serendipitous way. Modi government came in and did it in a jhatka. So these were the three successes or three pluses or three points on which the student gets excellent. Now we come to first of the three failures to achieve what India should have by now. So these are the points on which the student gets an average. So three failures to achieve what India should have by now. The first is a resumption of a full-fledged political and democratic process in Kashmir. Both new territories, that is Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, continue to be governed directly from Delhi. This is both unfair to the people of Kashmir and dangerous for India. BJP leaders take pride in having ended the era of the conflict entrepreneurs in the past, namely the Hurriyat leadership, and the fact is that Mir Wais has now been under house arrest for 3 years and nobody even noted it on its 3rd anniversary. We did not even see some Namka Baste protest from Pakistan. Forgotten. But dangers also lurk in this political vacuum. A fresh election needs to be held so the autonomy that every normal state in India deserves by right is restored to legitimately elected local leaders in Jammu and Kashmir as well. It's the same autonomy that, say, the state of Madhya Pradesh or Rajasthan or Tamil Nadu or West Bengal or Kerala enjoys. So if Jammu and Kashmir is going to be just any other state without special status, let them at least have the autonomy and the powers of an elected government of any state in India. Competitive space should also open up for existing mainstream politicians like the Abdullahs, Muftis and the rest. That New Delhi still nurses this paranoia in 3 years that it's unwilling to open up is a failure in my humble opinion. The second is a new communal injection between Jammu and Kashmir. Much of the political moves lately have been about widening the gulf between Hindu Jammu and Muslim Kashmir. It is perfectly legitimate for the BJP to aspire or to dream of having its own chief minister in Jammu and Kashmir. But to do this through communal division is nearly impossible unless you want to resume the cycle of fixed elections and puppets as chief ministers, and we know what result we get because of that in the past. Why should it be any different this time? That will set the clock back. In fact, that will set the clock back and take the valley to the old normal. The gains of these 3 years will then be frittered away. The process to take everybody along has been delayed so long that it is now looking deliberate, which is not a good thing. The third is the failure to deliver to the people of the valley any substantive peace dividend. Local intelligentsia, journalists, civil society live in fear. Many are hit with the toughest anti-terror laws and jailed for long, denied permission for travel overseas, and harassed in multiple other ways. By this time, central government should have had the confidence to loosen up. It is unsustainable to keep a region as large and so chronically volatile under tight control forever. It is also counterproductive. That's why we give the student average on these 3 points. What could have been achieved, these are the 3 points where what could have been achieved has not been achieved. Next we come to the negatives. These are the points on which the student gets a poor. So 3 excellent, 3 average and 3 poor. The biggest negative change over the past 3 years is increasing alienation among the young in the valley. This isn't the Kashmir youth of the 1960s and wish them away. These young people are modern, usually better educated and more freely articulate than their compatriots in other parts of the country, especially if I stick my delicate neck out and say compared to the Hindi heartland. They are also talented, ambitious, creative and global citizens in the networked cyberspace. The government's failure or reluctance, or maybe a bit of both, has left them angry. Ask any senior intelligence officer or army officer in the valley and they will admit to you how easy it's now become for militancy to sustain itself indigenously. Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, they can franchise and they do franchise their terror brand and their terror technology and expertise, export ideology and weapons, but manpower and ultimately and sadly the bodies will be all Indian. Whether these are Indians in the Indian Armed Forces or Indians in the terrorist squads of Kashmiris. That is a shame. The second is the near total failure either to bring any visible investment or any entrepreneurial activity from outside into Kashmir. There are many announcements, statements of intent, some conferences, some conclaves, but very little on the ground. What this means is that the Modi government has still failed to convince entrepreneurs elsewhere in India that Kashmir is safe, stable and like any other state in the country. That after all was a central, strategic and even ideological intent of taking away Kashmir's special status. Third, I believe, as I had written when the Ladakh standoff began in the summer of 2020, and I will share a link to that article with the description under this video, that it was a change of Kashmir's status that brought the Chinese PLA to our doorsteps in Ladakh. They are still there as our greatest threat. See it as the Chinese might have seen it, that Indians have split Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. They were one state earlier, so I also had a dispute with Ladakhi territory, with the Indians over Ladakhi territory, which is Aksai Chin, right? So Indians have now split as the Chinese would have seen it in all wise and fair and pragmatic strategic analysis. We must learn to look at the picture as our adversary might be seeing it. So look at how Chinese might have seen it, that Indians have split Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, which will now be centrally governed. Aksai Chin on the Indian map is a part of Ladakh. So in the Chinese view, they were also a party to Kashmir dispute because Ladakh was a part of Kashmir and Aksai Chin is a part of Ladakh. Now India has changed that, so I am explaining this point. The Modi government further asserted in parliament that it would take Aksai Chin back from us. That is what the Chinese are thinking. I am imagining it. Why don't we then go and remind these Indians that we are a party to the Kashmir dispute too? After all, they've taken quite a bit of land which we consider as our own from Kashmir, from Pakistan, in their border settlement, in their so-called border settlement with the Pakistanis, the Shaksgam Valley. Now, I'm not so delusional as to believe I can read the mind of the Chinese. Nor am I so stupid to think that the PLA brought 100,000 more soldiers into Tibet with its entire array of weaponry to 15,000 feet plus because they wanted a picnic. They don't want a picnic, they've come to give a message. And they've come to achieve something, and that something is not a little sliver of territory here and there. This looks like the most important and enduring downside of these 3 years.